Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. And on behalf of the Coalition of Urban Serving Universities, I'm pleased to welcome you to this afternoon's event, the release of findings from a national study on faculty cluster hiring for diversity and institutional climate. We also have a panel of speakers today who will comment on these findings and how they might be valuable to university leaders in their journey toward institutional excellence. This research emerged from an effort that is now several years in the making. Urban Universities for Health is an acronym which stands for Healthy Equity through Alignment, Leadership, and Transformation of the Health Workforce. It is a partnership between the Association of Public and Land Grant Universities, the APLU, the Coalition of Urban Serving Universities, and the Association of American Medical Colleges, AAMC, with funding from the National Institutes of Health. The project's aim is to improve evidence and to use data that will help universities enhance and expand culturally sensitive, diverse, and prepared healthcare workforce that will improve the health and health equity in underserved urban communities. I'd like to begin by telling you why this research is so important, particularly for universities and academic health centers. As you are all well aware, faculty are vital to achieving institutional excellence. They are the human capital that allows a university to achieve its missions of teaching, research, service, and patient care. Diversity among faculty is a critically important factor as well, for several reasons. First, a diverse faculty body improves the teaching and learning environment for all students, not just minority students. Faculty expose students to a wide variety of cultural perspectives that will expand their understanding of the world and help them develop critical thinking skills that they need for success. Second, evidence suggests that diverse teams produce higher quality research and develop unique solutions to problems. Collaboration among individuals with different backgrounds and perspectives is therefore critical to innovation and discovery at the university. Third, diversity in higher education helps universities graduate a workforce that meets our society's needs. This is particularly important in health and biomedical research fields. Lack of diversity in these areas perpetuates inequalities in our healthcare system, including limited access to care and poor health outcomes. This research is needed because recruiting a diverse group of faculty will have little impact if we do not create the structures and policies that will help us achieve the full benefits of diversity. Most important is the development of an inclusive environment that will encourage faculty from all backgrounds to stay and to thrive. Although progress has been made, we are not there yet. University leaders are starting to recognize the need to be more intentional and strategic about diversity and the structures that will help them achieve the full range of benefits from diversity, such as an inclusive climate where all students and faculty can thrive and an enriched teaching and learning environment that values many different perspectives. We all want to recruit and retain the best and most innovative scholars, and that is why it's so important to find out what works so we can build diverse communities of scholars that will propel our institutions to excellence. Today's web conference is interactive. I encourage you to submit your questions and comments throughout the presentation using the comment box on the Urban Universities for Health events page. We will also select questions at the end during our audience Q&A. And now I'd like to introduce my colleague Susan Phillips, who will present the findings from the study. Susan is the Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs at SUNY Downstate, and she is also Vice President for Strategic Partnerships at the University of Albany, SUNY. She served as the chair of the advisory committee that developed this study and will tell us more about that group's process for conducting the research, as well as the key findings from the study. Susan?
Thank you, Michael. And this is a really exciting time to be reporting on this study, a long-needed study. About 2 years ago, the Urban Serving Universities presidents brought together a number of leaders in the health professions to develop concrete action steps for diversity in the health workforce. One of the action items prioritized by this group was to generate more evidence about the emerging practice of faculty cluster hiring. A quick definition. The faculty cluster hiring concept is the practice of hiring multiple faculty into one or more departments or schools around interdisciplinary research topics or clusters. It's sometimes referred to as cohort hiring. This practice was pioneered by the University of Wisconsin-Madison as an effort to increase interdisciplinary research and collaboration. Since then, a number of universities, including several of our USU institutions, have developed similar programs with an intentional focus on faculty diversity and the development of a more inclusive campus climate. Each institution that has advanced this practice has developed its own programs quite differently. There have been significant departures from the model that UW-Madison created, and institutions have experimented with different hiring practices and formulas for success. Before now, we didn't know specifically what institutions were doing, how they structured their programs, or how they achieved success. This research was aimed to provide answers to those questions. In particular, we wanted to know first, what are the characteristics of the most successful programs? Second, what are some challenges that institutions experience that we might avoid in the future? And third, how have these programs impacted the diversity and the climate, both at the institutions that have developed those programs according to specific goals and those that have not? So a bit about methods. Over the past 6 months, we conducted interviews with leaders and senior faculty at 10 universities that have implemented cluster hiring programs. We included universities that intentionally focused on diversity in hiring, as well as a group of universities that focused on interdisciplinary research or research excellence. We interviewed provosts, vice provosts, deans, as well as a few senior faculty members who were hired through the cluster hiring process. This allowed us to gain different perspectives on the programs, from the leadership to the front lines. First, some definitions of diversity and climate. In this study, we used a fairly broad definition of diversity, adapted from the AAMC definition, which states that diversity embodies inclusiveness, mutual respect, multiple perspectives, and serves as a catalyst for change resulting in equity. So in this context, we're mindful of all aspects of human difference, such as socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, language, nationality, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, geography, disability, and age. Although the institutional climate is affected by many different variables, there are several core outcomes of interest to university leaders which we evaluated in our study. First, we wanted to learn about the academic success of faculty from all backgrounds. Second, we wanted to learn about an inclusive learning environment as perceived by students, faculty, and staff. Third, we wanted to learn about the collaboration among individuals from diverse backgrounds and across disciplines. And last, we wanted to learn a bit about the community engagement. So let me fast forward to the findings. The most important finding from this study is that cluster hiring can be a very effective strategy for universities aiming to increase faculty diversity, interdisciplinary collaboration, and other aspects of climate at the institution. However, these outcomes depend on how the program was designed and implemented, as well as the extent to which existing policies were accommodating the clusters. Some institutions have been very successful at achieving these objectives, and others have faltered. So let me spell out a couple of specifics about impact, about success factors, and about challenges. First, impact. I'll highlight three areas of impact: diversity, climate, and career success. First, the impact on faculty diversity. Many institutions reported that cluster hires as a group were more diverse than the faculty as a whole, but the degree to which diversity increased varied across institutions. Schools that saw diversity increase most also implemented supporting practices such as training search committees or selecting research topics related to diversity. Some reported that the investment of financial resources strengthened the university's existing commitment to diversity and made it more real, more evident. Second, the impact on institutional climate. An overwhelming number of interviewees said that the interdisciplinary collaboration had increased. Outcomes included more energy on campus, more non-traditional approaches to scholarship, increased respect for other perspectives, and the creation of cross-disciplinary projects. These effects were more prominent at schools that had established activities and infrastructure for collaboration, the ones that made it work. Cluster hires will also develop new partnerships with state and local governments, community organizations, and private industries. Third, the third impact I want to mention is the success of faculty from all backgrounds. In terms of career success, people hired in a cluster hire were just as successful, if not more so, than their peers hired through traditional means. However, the success depended on tenure and promotion guidelines that accommodated cluster activity, as well as establishing clear expectations about how faculty should spend their time. Not surprisingly, many minority faculty members found themselves in high demand by students seeking advisors and mentors, which left less time for research and publication. So let me turn to success factors. What were the characteristics of the most successful programs? I'll point to four. First, the first success is an intentional focus on diversity with supporting practices and policies in place. Schools that set out to recruit diverse faculty were able to do so by making that goal explicit and implementing supportive diversity practices, such as diversity training, including training for recognizing unconscious bias, forming diverse search committees, and broadening recruitment efforts. Second success factor, a broad base of support and buy-in from leaders, deans, and faculty. The most successful programs indicated that they had obtained what I'll call vertical buy-in for the program. These institutions engaged faculty from the very beginning and obtained buy-in from deans and department chairs, made it easier to transcend the disciplinary silos and to create joint appointments. Third success factor, clear expectations. Successful institutions revised their tenure and promotion guidelines to give credit for collaborative work that the new hires would engage in as part of the cluster. They developed clear written agreements with the new hires so that each scholar would know exactly what was expected of them. At schools that did not update their tenure process or provide clear guidelines, many faculty felt discouraged from engaging in collaborative work, and the clusters really didn't meet with any kind of fruition. And the fourth success factor is establishing an infrastructure for collaboration. In order for collaboration to happen, the scholars needed to develop trust and familiarity with each other's work. Many successful programs developed activities for the clusters ahead of time or set aside space for the cluster to convene. Appointing a leader for each cluster, either a faculty member or a staff cluster coordinator, helped keep the work moving forward and on track. One last note before leaving success factors, a note about funding models. Our advisory group, in thinking about this study, thought that at the beginning of this research that certain funding models would ensure success more than others. And we were wrong. Funding was definitely necessary, but the source of funding and the degree to which costs were shared seemed to have much less influence on the program's success than we imagined. Some schools funded their clusters centrally from the provost's office, while others asked colleges to contribute a percentage of funds. And in one case, external funding allocated by the state and local foundations was used to support the cluster hiring program. So let me turn last to the challenges that the institutions experienced, things to learn from. First, sustaining the program through leadership changes. One thing that makes cluster hiring very difficult is its dependence on support from senior leadership, usually the president or provost's office. Several schools noted that their cluster hiring programs were interrupted or put on hold, sometimes indefinitely, because of senior leadership changes. A second challenge was communicating the value across campus and across time. Because cluster hiring can have high upfront costs, it's sometimes difficult to appreciate that the clusters might change the university over the course of many years. Some schools reported difficulty obtaining buy-in from deans and department chairs because the costs and benefits were not clearly communicated. And last, some other issues that schools ran into included overworking the joint hires who had been placed in multiple colleges, picking topics that would remain relevant over time, and difficulty sunsetting clusters that were no longer active or engaged. Let me wrap up here by saying that there's much to be learned about the practices of these 10 institutions. And our advisory group developed a list of promising practices for the institutional leaders who are planning to move forward with these findings. These practices can be found in the report, and I will pause here, hand back to President Drake for a panel discussion, and I encourage all of the audience to submit your questions in our audience Q&A. Thank you. President Drake, back to you.
Well, thank you very much, Susan. That was great and informative. I have a question I'll wait for a while to ask, but it was great. So the first, we're going to have a moderated discussion now, and I'm going to first begin with the NIH and ask, what is the NIH's interest in diversity with regard to the biomedical research workforce and the health professions? And how are these findings important for the future of research and health equity? Next, I don't know who's answering on behalf of the NIH, so, oh yeah, so Mark maybe has to unmute. That's great.
It helps to unmute. Thank you, President Drake. It's really wonderful to be here and to participate in this panel discussion on cluster hiring, and it's really a privilege for my association to be affiliated with the Urban Serving Universities and the APLU. I serve as Chief Diversity Officer for the AAMC, the Association of American Medical Colleges, and also have the fortunate position of sitting on council at the National Institute of General Medical Science at NIH. And I can tell you I certainly don't purport to speak for the NIH, but I can tell you that the NIH is committed to thinking about these issues and committed to actually affecting change, positive change, and trying to diversify the biomedical workforce and really understanding evidence of what works, so much so that they have actually funded this Urban Universities for Health initiative. So they believe in this work and have been willing participants in a cooperative agreement with us, and again, APLU, to really engage in these activities. I'll give 3 points why the NIH is interested. I think the NIH, like many of our institutions, many of our associations and institutions such as the ones all of our participants belong to, have come to the realization that research itself, the things that people are interested in researching, really come from their past experiences, comes from the things that people that they are engaged with and what they're passionate about. So it doesn't take a huge leap to think that if people come from different backgrounds, have different experiences, have different perspectives, engage with others, that they would have different interests in the kinds of research that they do. And bringing that sort of opportunity for people who come from those different backgrounds to engage in research is of a high value to the NIH. So that's reason one. I think the second one is this connection that you've alluded to in your opening remarks around the connection between diversity and excellence. I think the NIH has recognized, like all of us, that we've solved all of the simple problems that we face in terms of research, or whether that's on the healthcare side. I mean, what we're left with now are really complex problems, or really complex issues that we need to, or the research we're doing currently, the interdisciplinary nature of that is really, really complex. And I think the NIH, and again, many of us, have recognized that diversity has the potential to be the antidote to complexity. That when you bring different perspectives and heuristics together, that we can really think more broadly about the problem and solving the problem with those different perspectives. So I think those are the two main reasons or rationales that the NIH is interested. But a third to really explicate their belief in this work, I think, is their somewhat recent hiring of a chief scientific officer for workforce diversity, Dr. Hannah Valentine, herself an NIH researcher, but also really an individual committed to developing these kinds of initiatives and utilizing the best evidence when it comes to diversifying the faculty at her tenure when she was there at Stanford. And now being at the NIH, really charged with leveraging the kind of learning that we're talking about here to begin to think differently about funding at the NIH and leveraging the work that we all do around unconscious bias, developing a culture of inclusion, and again, what we're here speaking specifically about, really diversifying our faculty members across the country.
Thanks very much. Appreciate that. And I think next we're going to go to Chancellor Woodson, if I'm correct, or maybe well, I see we've changed the order a little bit. So no, I think we're going yes to Chancellor Woodson. So Chancellor Woodson, your institution was featured heavily in the report, and you're also a true leader in cluster hiring, since you implemented programs at both Purdue and NC State. What was the initial impetus for the program at Purdue, and what were your original goals, and how have those goals changed over time?
Well, thank you, Michael. I think it's safe to say that the goal at both Purdue and now at NC State has been the same, and that is really to foster a climate where we focus on interdisciplinary research and opportunities to grow research and education through bringing clusters of faculty, cohorts of faculty together. I'd say that what really has changed or evolved in our thinking, which was both an experience at Purdue and now more recently at NC State, is the need, to, as it was pointed out in the report, to really change the culture of the institution by making sure that you have policies and procedures in place and that you have tenure and promotion guidelines that recognize faculty hired across clusters, and that you really bring the culture of the institution together along at the same time that you're hiring clusters. One of the pleasant surprises for me in this process has been the opportunity to focus on diversity of your faculty. And I think this is really a reflection on the fact that you're engaging the faculty in a very different way in the hiring process. You're also hiring a cohort of faculty across often a wide variety of disciplines, but with a common theme. And that affords you an opportunity to look at more diverse faculty because you're not limited by a specific discipline or a specific field. And it creates a lot of creativity from your faculty, the way they look at their colleagues. We also, through cluster hiring, implemented a real change in the culture at NC State, where we involve early in the process of recruiting conversation about diversity, conversation about diversity of thought on the committee, and how to create a diverse portfolio of candidates. And I think it's safe to say in our case that hiring across our entire campus has been improved from a diversity standpoint because of what we did with cluster hiring. It's impacted the way we hire across the entire portfolio of all of our disciplines. So it's been an exciting experiment, and it's no longer an experiment. It's an experiment that's run its course, and now we're into the third phase of it, or at least I am as a leader, having implemented cluster hiring in 2 institutions and now a second phase of it here at NC State. So it's been a very valuable experience for us.
Randy, thank you very much. And now, Mark Nevitt, you sit on the advisory council at the NIH Institute of General Medical Sciences, as you said, and understand NIH thinking about the importance of diversity and the benefit to biomedical research. So tell us, why is this such an important issue?
Thanks, Michael. I think this is, again, an important issue that spans beyond the NIH into all of our institutions. We've struggled mightily, as you know well, to diversify the nation's faculty members. And I think a big part of that is what I tend to call anticipatory non-socialization, which is sort of a phenomenon of individuals, minority individuals, being worried that they would come to campus and be the only one African American, the only one woman in a department, the only one of some particular background. And I think there's this walking onto the campus, walking potentially into the role as a faculty member, an expectation that things might not go well for me. And I think the opportunity that cluster hiring affords us is to mitigate that phenomenon of anticipatory non-socialization, recognizing that there's potentially others who may look like me, but also have similar interests to the kinds of things I'm hoping to do as a faculty member, whether that's research or my education focus, or oftentimes in the academic health center sort of clinical career. So I think cluster hiring has the opportunity. I think it's very important because it has the opportunity not to be a panacea or a silver bullet to diversifying the faculty, but it does give us one more tool in the toolbox to really fight against the struggle we've had in really diversifying the nation's medical schools, teaching hospitals, universities, higher education writ large.
Great, thank you very much. Susan, based on your knowledge of the study, which practices do you think are the most effective? And which ones would you suggest for leaders considering faculty cluster hiring programs to implement?
I'll offer up my top three. They all are focus on that this is not a post and hire kind of activity. This is really a very deliberate, planful, thoughtful investment in a future for the university. So the three that I would count on towards that, one is to engage the faculty and deans early on. Have that discussion about what this is about, link it to other diversity efforts, alter the way the search is done. That engagement not only brings the investment of the people who are already on the campus, but it communicates to those who you're trying to recruit that this is a place that is welcoming for you. The second thing that I would say is to give credit for clustering. It's great to hire a cluster, and then if you want to leave it alone, it's not so great. So giving credit for the work that is performed as part of the cluster, both in terms of meeting time, in terms of recognition that if they're part of two different departments, they need time recognition to be part of those two departments. And to have that reflected also in the promotion and tenure guidelines. Chancellor Woodson also mentioned that, and I think that's really very critical. The third piece is that I would say about this very deliberate process is making sure that the infrastructure is there to support collaboration. Don't leave this collaboration activity only to those people who are undertaking it, but support it, provide space, provide time, provide somebody to make sure that the work continues. Each of these three are really, when I speak about them, every president and provost will nod and say, of course, we wish we did that for all of our faculty hires. And of course we should, but we absolutely need to do it for the cluster hires.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it. Now, Mark, you've worked with universities and academic medical centers to improve institutional climate. Can you speak more about the importance of climate for students and faculty and how cluster hiring may help in this realm?
Absolutely, and I think Susan touched a little bit on this as well, so I'll try to expand on some of those comments. I think we've all heard the sort of comment that culture eats strategy for lunch every day. And I think that's extremely true in our environments, our academic environments, because while we have great strategy or tactics such as cluster hiring, simply bringing in a cluster of individuals without having the kind of leadership support, the requisite development of a culture, one that is willing to be inclusive in nature, one that is collaborative in nature, and really a culture of excellence. In the absence of that, cluster hiring, as the report indicates, is not a fail-safe if the culture is not ready for that kind of work. And the culture goes beyond, the climate and culture go beyond sort of an individual's perspective, but I really mean culture in the way it animates itself through policies, procedures, the tenure and promotion process. As you start thinking about cluster hiring, it probably is also a good time to think more broadly about what it means for pace to tenure. what it means for expectations for success, and what excellence means when we're talking interdisciplinary focus, as we have so many different institutions or schools within an institution that currently have different foci and strategies and policies, not just aimed at diversity, but overall to excel as a faculty member. So one has to think deeply, and again, I think this is elucidated well in the report, concretely about the culture that one expects if we're really going to harness the benefit of cluster hiring. Final thing I'll say is cluster hiring does give us, again, an opportunity to think deeply about developing a culture of inclusion. So it actually could be a tool to accelerate the pace for us to think about inclusion or inclusivity at our particular institutions. The president, in that role of leadership, of true leadership, in setting the expectations for whether it's cluster hiring or developing that culture of inclusion, is where it really begins, in my experience, throughout this country, really thinking about or meeting with leaders across the country. There's one final point I want to make on this, which is almost flipping it from the institutional focus to the individual focus. The other opportunity I have, privilege to have, is to run the largest minority faculty development program in the country. We have about 150 junior faculty, minority junior faculty, every year in our minority faculty development program. And it never fails that the first question I get after giving a talk to that group is, I've heard about this other campus, and I'm thinking about leaving my campus and going to another campus. And my response there is, the grass is not greener on the other side. The grass is greener where they water it. And the question for our institutions, and what I ask those junior faculty members to do, is to think about who's watering the grass. Don't simply look at the compositional diversity today, but actually look, are they doing strategies and tactics such as cluster hiring? Are they making an effort? Where do the funds come to support the individual? So it might not feel great on your campus today, but is the culture evolving? And that's a very important conversation. We shouldn't forget that this is a bi-directional process, that it's not just us, the institutions, developing our strategies, but are we ensuring we're having conversation with those junior faculty to ensure we're developing the programs in the most useful way.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it, Mark. For Randy, NC State is now poised to begin a new round of cluster hiring. What strategies or practices described in the report do you think will be most helpful to NC State as you move into, it's going to be the second round for NC State, but actually the third round for you?
I think the thing that I've taken away both from the report and my previous experience is what Susan referred to as a champion for the cluster. We've always had champions for our clusters because they're leading faculty that bring the proposals together for the recruitment process to begin with. But one of the things that we really have learned and we're implementing with this second round is we have to constantly give credit to the clusters. In fact, tomorrow morning, the first thing on my schedule is to welcome all of the clusters that are coming together for a day-long symposium, where each of them are talking about their progress, what they're doing, and then the new clusters that have recently been approved will be there to learn from those that are up and running. So this constant churn of giving credit to the cluster. The third thing that really has been a surprise to us, as I said, is the benefit that this type of hiring has on diversity and inclusion. And I think it's safe to say that with each iteration of cluster hiring that I've been involved in, diversity and inclusion has been an increasing part of the overall intention. And so we're going into this third round now, the second round at NC State, with diversity, spousal hiring, with opportunities as a bigger piece of what we're trying to accomplish. So those are the three things that I would offer.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And Susan, you've spoken quite a bit about the implications of the study for university leaders, and for those seeking to implement cluster hiring programs. What are the implications of this study for other actors, both within and outside the university?
Well, let me start by saying that I think that we are all players in making this work, from the faculty to the federal levels. So it takes all of that village. So with the faculty, I would say participate, engage, think about the new ways in which you too might join the work of this cluster to expand it and broaden it and to make the participants feel welcome in their new home. To the chief diversity officers, this is a hugely powerful tool in a larger inclusion agenda. Obviously, it's not the only tool, but it's definitely something that can be brought into the larger picture. Higher education associations, if I can call on APLU and ACE and others, can help all of the institutions benefit by learning about exchange of information between campuses to know what's working, what isn't working. I know that it is absolutely fascinating to listen to a successful institution such as NC State, hear what has happened and what has made it work. That will give enormous fuel to helping it happen in other places. State legislators, my goodness, some of the most successful cluster hiring programs were actually supported through state appropriations. And you can imagine that providing evidence. This report provides some of the evidence that there might be needed to make that case successfully with other legislatures. This is an excellent place for research excellence for solving the problems that have not been solved yet. I love that description that the easy problems we've already taken care of. It's the hard ones that remain, and the diversity of discipline and approach is what will take to make those solve, as well as graduating a workforce that will meet the workforce needs. I mean, all of these are potential approaches to the legislators that get your gov relations folks involved. This could be a great tool for them. And for NIH, for HRSA, for other government agencies, I got to say that the Urban Universities for Health has really provided this study so that it will help improve the federal programs that are funded, inform future funding decisions, and perhaps even fund initiatives that promote and activate these clusters to give them more life as well. So as I said, we're all players in this, from the faculty to the federal. Everybody has a good hand in and can make this work in a larger, much more systematic way.
Thanks very much, Susan. We're going to go to the questions now from the audience. There have been questions that have been coming in and they'll be posted. I'm going to begin, though, as we first tee these up and ask Susan a question about the study. You mentioned that cluster hires were more diverse than there's more diversity among the cluster hires than the faculty as a whole. But cluster hires would be necessarily more recent, since this is a more recent program. So if you looked at cluster hires compared to, say, hires over the last 5 years, was there a significant or a measurable difference between the diversity of cluster hires and other recent hires? I would expect, as I said, there will be a difference between 2010 to 2015 hires and 1990 hires. But how about cluster hires to more recent hires across the board?
I don't have the nationwide data on that, but the data that we saw in this particular set of cluster hire faculty institutions, one of the things that we did see over the period of time, and the cluster hiring programs ranged from probably 20 years old to much more recent. So that kind of time span, that proportion of hires in the cluster hiring program did enhance the diversity of the faculty by some noticeable percentage, 2% here, 4% there. I don't have the national data that to match that, but would be happy to find that out and send it to you, because I'm sure it's compelling over the time period.
Appreciate it. Thank you. And actually, we have the first question. And this is from Tom Peterson, Provost at UC Merced. Hi, Tom. Have the 10 institutions you surveyed, I think anyone can jump in on these things, but again, Susan, a lot of this might be directed toward you because of the survey. But have the 10 institutions you surveyed found any significant correlations between specific academic disciplines and the enthusiasm or lack thereof for multidisciplinary cluster hires? In other words, are some disciplines more enthusiastic about cluster hires than others?
Excuse me, I had to get to the unmute button. Excellent question, and one that I'm going to answer with a no. The enthusiasm for cluster hiring is pretty much universal. Where there is an identified interest and need, giving one example, I think it was just up the river from you in Chico, was a water initiative, and hiring a cluster around that particular issue. There's enormous excitement about those areas. So it's not specific to the disciplinary topic or the nature of the question, and in general, there's a great deal of excitement anywhere they are done, in any location that they're done. So you'll see in the report, which I'll point you to, and you'll see the Chico example there. Examples of the specific cluster areas that were done and the success with them. So I would refer you to that as well. Hi.
Great, appreciate it. Actually, having lived in California, it's one river to Sacramento and another above, so it's two rivers. But I'm not going to. I'm teasing you. Okay, the next question is from Asher Nissim, the professor at Virginia Commonwealth University. And the question is, it's generally understood that diversity and inclusion are separate processes, and in some cases, separate outcomes. From an evaluative perspective, how are these 10 universities measuring inclusion, the degree or extent to which underrepresented minority faculty are included in creative and scholarly enterprises? And I think that can be, again, for anyone.
Thanks.
But Susan, you certainly can start.
Well, let me do a quick start just from the perspective of the 10 institutions. One of the things that we wanted to clarify in our study was what the definitions were that people were using, because it really is those two words, inclusion and diversity, and even cluster, has different meanings in different institutions. So you'll see some of that in the report about how the different institutions defined it. I don't have a uniform answer for you about the differences between diversity and inclusion, although I would bet that Mark has some thoughts from the AAMC point of view. I see him nodding. So let me hand off to you.
Thanks, Susan.
Yeah.
So I would say there's a distinct difference. I mean, a simple way to think about it would be diversity is merely the differences, and we labeled some of those earlier in Susan's open remarks, but there are all those differences that range from socioeconomic status through race, ethnicity, LGBT status, et cetera, et cetera. But diversity is nothing more than differences, and this might sound odd coming from the chief diversity officer, but the diversity by itself is not the goal. It's not what we're trying to achieve. What we're trying to achieve in this particular case and in this cluster hiring piece is really excellence in research. And diversity is a tool to get us there. Bringing those different people together is merely a tool, an important tool, a critical tool, one I care a lot about, but it is a tool. It actually needs, though, inclusion, and there are many definitions, but I'll give the audience a simple way to think about inclusion. Inclusion is the fuel that animates that diversity. So just bringing different people together, nothing magical happens. In fact, you can turn on CNN and look around the world. You bring different religions, different cultures, different backgrounds. Nothing automatically good happens when you do that. It's necessary to have that fuel of inclusion, to set the necessary expectations of how we harness the differences or how we leverage the differences of individuals. I can't speak specifically to the 10 institutions, but I can tell you across this country, I've been to 95 medical schools at this point, and I can tell you that every one of them are thinking deeply and concretely about measuring the impact of those differences and measuring their culture of inclusion. And we don't have enough time to go into it, but there are many tools that are currently developed or in the development phase, many survey instruments. We've created one called the Diversity Engagement Survey that we've now had 22 academic health centers use to really understand if they're building a culture of inclusion, whether it's faculty, students, employees. Ohio State happens to be one institution that's used that survey. So there are instruments out there, and I guess directly to the point of the question, I think we are at a point where we have enough definitional understanding of what these are and how to measure them, and I think it's many of our institutions are getting about the business of measuring this, with the goal really being excellence, not diversity, not inclusion. Two tools that have to be married together so that we can achieve the excellence we seek in our research enterprise.
So Mark, if you got the excellence without any diversity or inclusion, you'd say that's fine?
I would say if you got the excellence, I can say it in the way I talk more about it or think more about it. If we had, in the physician world, if every physician tomorrow wore black and brown magically, and we still had health disparities out there, I would say we have not been successful. So to me, it's not just the differences, it's leveraging those differences. So I would, to answer your question, Michael, I don't think you can get to excellence given the challenges we face, the complexity of the challenges we face, without leveraging those differences. All of the brains that are in our urban school environment and our rural environments, all those kids that we think about that are in underperforming schools, thinking that's not our role and responsibility. I think the time is upon us to think differently about harnessing those talented kids all across this country, because we suffer as higher educational institutions without leveraging that difference. And just one statistic to try to amplify the point. The under 18-year-old population in this country is already minority majority. So I would question every higher educational institution, where are we going to source our talent from if so many of our kids, so many of those minority or underprivileged or low socioeconomic status individuals, students, are in poor performing schools? So you cannot get to excellence, in my mind, without having diversity. So I guess I don't agree with the question.
Well, I guess I was trying to be a little bit provocative, and it seems that I provoked you. So maybe if we can go to Kathy Leckman, who actually program director here at Ohio State, and this one probably is a good one for Randy. But broadly, can the panelists provide some examples of policies and procedures that are being referenced, just the specifics of how things that have happened, maybe some of the things you've done at NC State, Randy?
Yeah, I think the thing that I learned early on as a provost was that if you don't modify policies and procedures to be consistent with how to evaluate, reward, and to measure success of faculty, then you're going to fail, because so many of these faculty are coming from multiple departments, coming from across the university. So what we've done at NC State is we've modified our promotion and tenure guidelines, but we also have something called the Statement of Mutual Expectation. This is an agreement that the department head typically has with a faculty member each year as they begin their academic year. And it really is it's part of the annual review process. So here at NC State, what we've done is we've involved the cluster leader in that Statement of Mutual Expectations of a member of the cluster. And it gives a voice to the cluster in the evaluative process of a faculty member. And I think it's a big part of the change in the culture that will ultimately help our clusters be successful. So those are a couple of examples.
Appreciate that. Appreciate those. Next question. This is from Jeff Vitter, who's Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor at the University of Kansas. And Jeff asks, please expand more about the mechanisms to ensure that the newly hired cluster faculty and the existing faculty in the area continue to engage and collaborate, especially on major funding initiatives. And I think that can go to anyone, but maybe, again, Randy, you might be a good one there since you've overseen these programs.
Well, I think the key to the start of this is to involve faculty in the process of developing the clusters and evaluating the clusters before you actually make a decision to pay for them or to support them. The second process that's critical is, as Susan said this earlier, is that you have a mechanism for celebrating the clusters so that faculty across campus understand what's happening and can get engaged. And you make investments. One thing we know in universities is when you make key investments to bring faculty together, it's one of the sources of attraction for people across campus, so it tends to work.
Great. So next question. This is from the principal. I want to make sure I pronounce it correctly. Alicia Nodler, Associate Vice President for Research from University of Oklahoma. I can at least pronounce Alicia. Cluster hiring around a theme often competes with the cluster for funding, especially for junior faculty seeking to establish their identity as scholars. What are some of the best practices to enable faculty to secure funding if they need an independent line of funding to establish their credibility and independence? Maybe Susan will try that one, if I can tee it up for you. Things that work to help people get the funding that they needed.
Sure, I'll take some of that. That was not a focus of our study, but one of the things that I think you'll hear from the other panelists is that the faculty development initiative to be able to not only encourage this particular cluster to thrive, but to encourage this particular scholar to thrive will include everything that is traditional, all of the grant assistance, the mentoring, the review of a grant proposal, the linking with partners to create grant opportunities. All of those things would apply in this case as it would for any hired faculty. I'm mindful that the practices that we're describing here across all of our responses are things that we should be doing for all successful faculty, and certainly have to be a part of the cluster hire experience as well. I would bet that Mark and Randy also have some perspectives on the faculty development, how to help a faculty member succeed in getting their own track record up and running.
Maybe, Mark, I could ask you if you'd like to comment.
I would just make one comment. I also think there's an opportunity for us to think about how we engage the NIH in the novel approaches we're having on our campus and what that could mean for funding streams. The NIH clearly has been thinking more deeply and putting more funding into interdisciplinary research, and that's why this is such a good partnership, because we were able, through this evidence-based study, to really show the NIH that this is a tactic moving in showing success and moving in the right direction. So what I hope is there will be some benefit back for the NIH as they think about structuring their funding streams and funding initiatives, so that even our junior faculties, as we think, we might start to develop new K awards for those junior faculties at the NIH. So I'm hoping that this is, I'm positive that this will not be a report that sits on the shelf, but will have high utility at the NIH and at many of our institutions. It's going to take both, and I don't mean, I shouldn't limit this to NIH. I should say there's opportunity to think about NSF and other major federal and philanthropic funders, quite frankly.
Great. Randy?
One of the things that the approach we took was we went out and asked faculty in standing up a cluster, is this cluster one built around junior faculty or senior faculty? In other words, as you develop a core area of the university, do you have a number of junior faculty that need senior leadership? Or do you have a number of senior faculty that are really looking to bring more junior faculty into the fold? Regardless of which approach you use, and it varies for clusters at NC State, the one thing that we've learned is mentorship, and we all know this in higher education. Mentorship is a critical piece of bringing junior faculty up through the ranks. And clusters are another group of devoted mentors to new junior hires that are part of the group. So we found that a number of the junior hires in clusters here are having success because they're joining a group that is helping them to develop as a new member of the academy.
Great, thank you. We have one more question. This probably will be about our last. This is from Vivian Lewis, Vice Provost for Faculty Development and Diversity, University of Rochester. The question is, could the panel please provide examples of the subjects and disciplines among the faculty hired in successful programs? So I would love to hear some examples of things that have worked in the real world. I know we have some here at the Ohio State University. Maybe I'll go to Susan, and you did this study. Can you give some examples of how some of these programs?
Yeah, I'm looking to see if I can pull up the actual examples. There was one around water in California, and I may have misspoken the location. It may be Fresno rather than Chico, but different part of the state.
No, understand.
My apologies. As a
no teasing.
As a card-carrying Californian, I should not make that mistake. We've also had ones that are focused on sustainability, I'm just looking to see if we've mentioned further ones here. Randy, I'll toss to you to make sure that I've got the pieces while I'm looking here. Entrepreneurship here. I'm just trying to make sure I've got the pieces here. Entrepreneurship, some that did the water resources, urban entrepreneurship, local community organizations. Those are ones that I can think of. Randy, the ones that you did at NC State and at Purdue?
Yeah, but I'd say that, well, we've gone through about 20 here at NC State, and some of the most successful, that is those that had the largest number of faculty that went through the hiring process quickly and smoothly, are things like data sciences, big data, something Michael and Ohio State is very involved in as well. Another important one for us was genomics and society, which brought together a group of philosophers and sociologists with geneticists that are working in genetically modified organisms, particularly around agriculturally relevant organisms. That was a big one for us. So they're typically, at least for us, involve at least 2 colleges, often more than 2, and faculty from across a wide array of disciplines that are in an emerging or a fully entrenched problem area. Water was one that we were involved in as well.
Great. And
Michael, can I add just...
Sure, Mark, please.
Yeah, I just want to add 2, not examples, but 2 places I think are ripe for this kind of innovation, again, from the sort of world I live in. One is around neuroscience. If you think about what's happening in neuroscience, psychiatry, psychology, neurology, quite frankly, the opportunity at the academic medical center and maybe other institutions there's a convergence of those particular fields that I think are ripe for this kind of cluster hiring, to think and to bring along some new minds, some junior faculty in this particular space. That's one area I personally think is ripe for that kind of innovation as cluster hiring is. The second is around health equity. I think across the country, there's been a greater and deeper understanding of the social determinants of health. And when you start thinking about what that requires in terms of law, schools of design, architecture, you start thinking about individuals who are focused on food insecurity, you start thinking about the physicians, you start thinking about public health, and really bringing that together, really teams to focus on a local area. Health equity project or health disparity project actually requires tools like cluster hiring because the funding mechanisms are so diffuse in that space. I mean, we're fortunate that we have the National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparity, which actually supports this initiative. But there are other funding mechanisms that if we think concretely about partnering across our enterprise to really focus on health disparities, I would say, goes beyond a complex problem to actually being an ambiguous one, one that we don't yet even have the right questions to. I think cluster hiring gives us the kind of opportunity and becomes the kind of tool that can maybe accelerate our pace to solving some of these seemingly intractable problems.
I appreciate it. I was going to give a couple of quick examples, too, for Vivian. So one, broad topics like food security and nutrition. involve hiring people from multiple disciplines to do the research, and then also multiple disciplines to make the policies the one enacts very effective in different neighborhoods and different communities. And we've done a great cluster in that. They're moving forward with it. Another one that touches on part of what Mark was just saying, we've had a wonderful cluster hire between the colleges of engineering and medicine looking at spine research and things where colleagues from different points of view can look at biomechanical devices, etc., along with clinical scientists and neurologists to move forward. So I think this is it's an area that's really, really important. They're great examples that's really been exciting to see. First, nice to visit with my colleagues, you know, and nice to see you, Randy, and hope all is going well. And Mark, you know, I was thinking, actually, I was moving something on my bookcase today that was something I got in the name of Herb Nickens a few years ago, and I actually just moved it this afternoon, and so it was nice to see you in that role. And Susan, as a card-carrying Californian, nice to see you as well. Although I know that you've migrated to a chillier climate that's still that's really great. And our time rapidly has come to an end, so this concludes our broadcast for today. But I encourage everyone to read the full report, which is available for download online at uuhealth.org. That's uuhealth.org. And please feel free to share the report with your colleagues. And I hope that the information shared today was valuable to you and will aid you in your efforts to increase faculty diversity and improve the climate at your institution. Thank you all for being a part of this. This was great. Thank you.
Thank you.